we empower developers with privacy-preserving tools for user identity management. This podcast dives into how digital identity is transforming industries at the intersection of Web 2 and Web 3. Now, before we begin, as always, please don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. Your support definitely makes a difference. And today, we're diving into the world of compliance. And not the boring checkbox kind, but the kind that keeps stuff moving forward, keeps fast-moving teams grounded while building cutting-edge products. We're joined by Stas Bojoukha, CEO at Compyl. Compyl is a platform built by former Chief Information Security Officers, CISOs. We'll hear a lot about that in this episode. Compyl helps companies automate and scale their compliance programs. Now, if you've ever tried building in crypto, AI, identity, while staying compliant, you know that stuff is the real challenge. So let's get into it. Stas, please introduce yourself, introduce Compyl. I know I did a decent job at it, but you can maybe add to that.
Absolutely. Well, Titus, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me. I'm Stas Bojoukha. I'm the CEO and founder of Compyl. My former background is information security and compliance. I've been in this space for a long time. I've got everything from like a CISSP to CEH, which is a certified ethical hacker. I grew up in the security and compliance space. I've been a former CISO, and the product essentially helps companies mature their information security and compliance needs. We're calling it Next Gen GRC. It's a very wide-reaching platform that does a lot of different things, and it's highly configurable, drag and drop changeable, no code.
Awesome. So I think let's start with the biggest misconceptions. What do you think people think about the industry that you don't agree with?
Yeah, I think with like things like Mr. Robot and things like that, I think that we saw like a surge of popularity in the security space a while back. It's kind of like with the CSI phenomenon that happened in like the 2000s, where everyone thought like forensics was like super sexy and like really exciting and like really high pace. Where like security is high pace and there's a lot of things happening. It's very due diligent oriented and very nuanced and detailed, and can be very boring if it's not catered to the right audience. So I think that's one of the main misconceptions with the security space. With compliance, like I think the other misconception here is that the attack vectors or like the attackers are using really sophisticated means, like we're seeing on TV, all the sophisticated tooling and hacking and it really just, a lot of it still is really just coming down to sending very well crafted emails and getting people to click on links and giving up their credentials. I mean, not to take away from like state level funded cybersecurity incidents and things like that, but like the vast majority that we're seeing is still very much unsophisticated attacks. They have gotten more sophisticated now with the use of AI, just like better crafted phishing emails. But the vast majority of it is still people just clicking on things that they shouldn't, and just not following policies or not having policies in place from the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think like it's one of those things like if your cybersecurity is exciting, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah, so exactly. Kind of like government.
Yeah, and investing. Investing should be boring. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, totally agree. And I think that's the part that we've seen more and more signals in the industry where there's like flags being put up by like IAM providers, PAM providers as well, saying like, well, hey, ultimately the problem is now it's easier. The barrier of entry to large scale phishing attacks has been lowered significantly. It's cheaper than ever. It's easier than ever to craft emails that convert well. And by convert, I mean you get the least kind of attentive person or educated person in the org to click, and then you get their credentials and you start kind of like moving yourself up in the org that way. That seems to be the biggest attack vector from what we've heard as well.
Absolutely.
So before we dive too deep into things, I want to level set with people that are like not very familiar with the space. Like, what is a CISO, and like what orgs have one?
Yeah. So generally, CISO is a Chief Information Security Officer. they're generally more geared towards organizations that are slightly larger, and I'll explain what that means. So the rule of thumb generally is once an organization is about 60 people, they should have a dedicated information security person, whether that's an officer, an analyst, an engineer, and then it pretty much scales up from there. Once you have once you have about 3 information security professionals dedicated to an organization, you start looking for like a chief information security officer. The chief information security officer is a C-suite level executive that is getting more and more recognition on boards, especially over the past 5 years and over COVID. And they're weighing in on business decisions because there's so many businesses that are now affected by information security and having a good security posture and just being able to compete and do business. So it's an executive just really focused on security. And then there's also a debate that's going on about whether that CISO should report into the CIO or CTO or the CEO, and that debate has been ongoing for a long time. But I guess that's for another podcast.
Sounds like the VP of marketing. Like, who should that report to?
Exactly that.
So also for people, like we're going to be talking about like standards and certifications and whatnot. For those who aren't familiar, can you just explain to our audience SOC 2 and ISO 27001?
Yeah, absolutely. So these they're essentially standards and frameworks. So a SOC 1, SOC 2, they're reports. So they're an attestation from an auditor that basically says the controls that this organization says that they have in place are in fact there, and we've reviewed it and we're comfortable to put our name against it. And if they're not comfortable with it, they can qualify the report, which basically means that there is an issue, and then they can specify what the issue is. Management also has the ability to put their management review notes within the SOC report as well. ISO is a certification. ISO is more rigid and more focused on the organization as a whole, where SOC 2 is per product. So if an organization has multiple products, they'll probably have multiple SOC 2s or SOC 1s. SOC 2 is for security, availability, privacy, and a few other domains, but for that product. SOC 1 is more the financial operations of the business are in place, operating well. 4I principles of review, things like that are in place for the organization. ISO 27001 is more organizational focused. It's more international. So you'll often see ISO more in like the European markets, where you'll see the SOCs more in the North American markets.
Yeah, and I think the other kind of question that comes to mind when looking at these as like a founder, a builder, but a team kind of working on SaaS products or any kind of software, why do these matter so much in the corporate world, enterprise world especially?
Yeah, so in probably about like 7 or 8 years ago, the SOC reports and ISO reports were very hard to come by and were very expensive and were very manual. And generally, they were reserved for organizations that got to a certain size. Generally, about 100 people, or like about $30 million of revenue is when they started looking at these things seriously. And that's because the type of businesses that they would start doing business with would require some assurance that they have security controls in place. They have a certain maturity, and they took it seriously. What's recently changed is SOC more so than others has become more of a commodity. It is now there has been a lot of auditors that have popped up. The governing body for SOC is the AICPA. I can't remember what the acronym stands for right off the top of my head. But basically, if you're a CPA, you can basically spin up an auditing firm within a day. It doesn't cost very much money, and then you can be accredited body that issues SOC reports. There's been a lot of infighting in the industry recently about this. It's significantly more harder to become an ISO auditor, or like a high trust auditor is almost next to impossible. FedRAMP, StateRAMP, or now GovRAMP. So like the barrier to entry for SOC is quite. It's not as high as the others. So the reports are getting more scrutiny than they ever have before, because the people that are issuing them are not as the integrity just isn't there for some of them. that's kind of how that piece works. But in terms of like why customers why customers are pursuing this is because since the cloud revolution of like 2014, a lot of organizations have, startups have all gone cloud. It's a lot easier now to build a product, get a product out to market, get it in front of an enterprise level buyer. Enterprise level buyer wants the same thing that previous larger organizations had. So that's why it's become more and more of a thing to get a SOC 2 ISO certification and things like that.
Yeah, I feel like we were having these conversations, and even in like 2016, in a kind of smaller Series A SaaS company, like SOC 2 was kind of, we were reaching for it, whereas ISO was still like, hey, we need to grow a little bit more until we get there.
Yeah, and it normally was only the big four that were doing it as well, and then you had a handful of other auditors doing it as well. So it was really difficult to actually get the auditors. It was also very expensive.
So it sounds like that's a challenge definitely for the industry. Are there any other big challenges that you see like the industry's grappling with right now?
I mean, there's always a lot. There's always a lot of things going on. So a lot has changed, but at the same time, a lot has also stayed the same. A lot of organizations still are very much focused on like the bells and whistles of of technology, and often let things fall through the cracks of the fundamentals, like proper policy, standard and procedure management, really boring stuff, asset management, user access reviews, identity access management, like pen testing, just like the basics of like a good security posture, are still falling through the cracks. It's, I think a lot of organizations are still in this mindset of one and done, and not constantly maintaining things. And I think that's where we're still seeing the gaps in security postures through a lot of organizations. While things have gotten a lot better in terms of like AI being able to aggregate data and being able to correlate different data sets and give you analytics and things like that, a lot of the day-to-day operational stuff is still being missed, and they're still causing a lot of holes. So that's definitely an issue. The SOC 2 reports, but not accredited bodies or not good accredited bodies, is also definitely a big issue at the moment. And the landscape is just changing so fast right now in terms of regulations, technologies. There's a lot of moving pieces, and it's a very complicated space, and there's not enough people in it. So anyways, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. So there's a shortage of information security professionals in this space to begin with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I feel like the space is moving in almost like the ethos around cybersecurity that had to shift maybe 10 years ago from DMZ, trusted execution environment, kind of rigid boundaries, firewalls, to let's build a flexible, fluid system that gets updated every time something changes or the environment around us changes.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that. The amount of companies that are just now operating without firewalls or any type of networking equipment whatsoever, because they're just fully cloud-based SaaS and are just doing this, the zero trust model, which it's just it's nothing, it's not new technology, right? It just basically means that we're VPNing into a trusted environment, and then we're making sure that the devices are trusted and people are trusted, and verifying them. And in a lot of ways, the cloud has made things a lot simpler, but also there is also that risk that once you're in, you have access to everything like that. That defense in depth strategy has also kind of gone by the wayside as well. So everything's a trade-off. It just depends on what the organization is doing, and applying a reasonable level of security to the organization, knowing what that organization does, how it makes money, protecting the revenue sources. All sounds a lot easier said than done, but.
Well, this is tying back to kind of the first conversation we had at the beginning of the show. It's phishing is so successful because once you get your hands on those tokens, those authentication tokens, then you can wreak havoc in the org. If those tokens are not reasonably killed after a period of time, reasonably
They just announced literally a month ago that they're going to start expiring the tokens, and the ones that are not being used are going to expire faster. But they literally just announced that. So that's very timely that you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's definitely top of mind for everyone in this industry. So I want to double down on the AI piece. Like I read that you guys leverage AI to streamline compliance and risk management processes. I think the thing that's top of mind is like, especially in high stakes environments, how do you ensure you're not losing control or context as you're building with AI because you're relying a lot of the thinking to be done by the algorithm rather than like by people.
Yeah, I mean, with us, we've heavily leveraged AI in the platform, and it's been game changing to us because like the biggest problem that we've had in like the governance risk and compliance space is a lot of it has been very manual, and like a lot of it has been very driven by like user input and text, and it's just like nobody has the time, nobody wants to do it. So like leveraging AI to be able to pull in data from a lot of different data sets, being able to make sense out of it has been really game changing for us. But at the same time, you want to make sure that the data that's coming in has been properly vetted, that you have proper access controls in terms of who is able to input that data, that you have the ability to run different models in different scenarios based on what you're trying to do as a company. Um, but yeah, it's putting in those proper controls is uh, it's really important. I mean, it's just like garbage in, garbage out. Yeah.
And that's, I think, the hard thing about this kind of implementation is like there's really no rule book out there. Like it's like what is proper? How do you define that? How should companies build that strong compliance posture in this case?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that was like in the security space, like up until like really like 2013, I don't think ISO was the first one to release a framework, but they released the 27001 2013 like standard, and I think that was like the first one that really was like this is how you put in proper, like this is what good looks like in an organization. And NIST is only from 2016, like so all of that is relatively new. And then we have the new AI, like NIST AI framework. We have the EU AI Act. We have the 27701 for ISO as well. So like there are standards that are coming out, but they're just the foundation of them. But they're still good practices. Like so that would probably be the best way to just get um, just to get an idea of like how like where you stand, like even if you're not complying with it, just to be able to run an assessment against one of those, just to see like how far out you are from what industry best practices are. I think are very valuable. I think that's for any. I mean, doing like a self-assessment against anything that you're worried about is a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I always love not having to start from scratch and relying on some like work of very smart people that spend years building these standards to like make sure that people do have a foundation to stand on when it comes to this compliance aspect. So you guys wrote a blog post on this, actually creating a culture of compliance, and I think that's like I want to dive into that. It's something we here at Civic, we try hard to put that in practice. We've been around for over 10 years in the crypto space. That is like grandfather time. And I think from that perspective, like it'll be great to get your point of view on what does that look like? What's the best practice when creating a culture of compliance in fast moving environments, startups, move fast, break things, implement stuff, connect your SSO to whatever new tool and so on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess we had a little bit of a helping hand, knock on wood. Like both myself and my co-founder are former CISOs. So when we started the company, when we started the company, right, we were writing policies and making sure policies align like to customer environments. Everything is super basic. And as we've grown and as we've hired more and more engineers, I think like 2/3 of the company are engineers at this point. Um, like we've had to instill in them like a level of fear, if you will, like that the type of data that they have access to is very, very critical. And you'd be surprised in terms of how many people don't understand um, how the companies that they work for, like what type of data they have, why that data is very valuable and sensitive. I'm not talking about us, but like if you take it to something like if you take into like something like banking or financial services, like the amount of people that are working there are only, are working there, especially on the engineering side, or, it pays well. It's an engineering job, but the amount of them don't understand like what like position data is, or like what like, um, M&A information and why it would be like valuable. Like the amount of people that don't understand that, you'd be shocked. And it's just because it's not an interest of them, and the job for them at the end of the day is developing code and, building products. I think the reason I'm saying that is I think once you explain to an employee like why certain things are the way that they are and the type of controls that are in place, or the reason why we need to keep certain things in the way that they are. Like we have to have Chinese walls in place between like these different departments, and the reason we're doing that is because if somebody gets a hold of this type of data, they can then be able to manipulate the markets, and this is what it actually means, and this is what it actually means for you personally if this actually happens. It's explaining to them like why certain things are the way that they are and the reason that they need to be maintained. It's whenever you go and you make a large change to an organization. Like I'll give you an example. Like if a company decides that it's no longer going to be allowing, or that it's going to be implementing um, corporate device management across all devices, and basically blocking out not allowing personal and corporate data to interconnect. A lot of people will get upset with that, right? They're gonna be like, "Well, this is so convenient. I have one device. Like now I have to carry two devices, or like all the data I can't transfer from one to another and can't copy and paste." Um, that seems really like a pain for employees. But when you explain it to them, like it's corporate data, it has to be separated. We have to hold it for 7 years for compliance reasons. Like we're getting more scrutiny. This is what our customers are asking for. That goes a really long way, rather than just rolling it out and not explaining it to anybody. So like that's kind of like the culture of compliance, is explaining and getting everybody involved in in maybe not the decision making process, but at least explaining to them what the decision making process was and how we got here, and like why we're doing it and how it's protecting the business and the bottom line. And so yeah, that's kind of how we've been approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the way I'm looking at it is, and I've seen it done before, is like as long as you're producing some value, you're charging people for your services like 5, 6, 7 figures, whatever your business model is, and you're handling even more so HIPAA or PSI, PII, whatever protected data or classified information if you're in that business, then those are, I mean, that those carry not just like company wide consequences, but like personal consequences for the person responsible for those breaches. And you might find yourself in a very complicated legal situation as well as an individual, not just the company itself.
Absolutely. And that's also a very good thing to explain to them, that it's no longer just isolated to being a corporate problem. It can be a personal problem depending on your involvement.
So YOLOing 5 years of, I know, financial data into a personal account tied LLM is probably not a good idea, right?
Definitely not a good idea. Yeah, definitely not a good idea. That's going to be a problem in itself very soon.
I mean, I think it already is.
Yeah.
I just think people just don't see it yet. I think the good conversation that I've been hearing, at least at RSA or like Identiverse and all these like security identity conferences, is people are still chasing shadow AI use and shadow tool use in many cases, like for like the SOC 2 compliance purpose and ISO compliance purpose. If I'm an employee of a company, I'm using my personal, for example, Gmail account to log into ChatGPT or into Claude, and then using that with company data, that's a big security no-no.
Absolutely, but it's still it's one of those things where it's still very difficult to track and detect this type of activity, even with like a sophisticated SIEM and logging mechanism. And there's a few different products. I mean, there's a few different products, but they rely on having log access to like Google or Chrome logs to be able to see what people are doing. But it's still like it is way too easy to get around these type of things still, and like shadow IT is a huge problem in the industry still.
Yeah, and I think it's only going to get worse as we're kind of bringing autonomous agents in the mix. So how do you see that concept of culture of compliance evolving and adapting to this kind of new player in the space, essentially?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way that I see it, and was literally on a panel yesterday talking about this. The way that I see it is like AI is going to be great for like agentic AI is going to be great for helping with all the day-to-day operational things that have been really really difficult to like to do in the past, or just been really boring that nobody wants to do them. So I think that that's going to be a great shift, and then we can start focusing on strategy. But at the same time, we're also going to start seeing we're going to start seeing fallout from that as well, right? Production changes being made by AI, right? Like what's the change management controls that we're going to put in place on that? Like how do we vet it? How do we maintain it? How do we ensure that it doesn't lock us out and then we're locked out of the entire organization? Like there's a lot of like it's two steps forward, one step back with all of this, but it could have really really significant knock-on effects for organizations. I mean, we saw it with CrowdStrike as well, right? Where like CrowdStrike is a great product. They're industry leaders. They have every certification that you could possibly imagine under the sun, and yet they still fumbled a change, right? So like it just basically meaning that it could happen to anybody, and nobody is above it, or anyone that like. It's just going back to my earlier point of like the fundamentals. Fundamentals are hard, and they need to be taken seriously, and like we need to make sure that we put in proper controls, have a human in the loop, and trudge through it the best we can.
Yeah, I try to kind of give a visual anchoring to this because it sounds all abstract and with agentic AI. For me, it is almost like I'm one of those like circus people that are able to spin plates on sticks.
Yeah.
And I can do 2 or 3 now without AI. With AI, I can do 20, 30. But still, if something goes wrong, now I have 30 broken plates, not 3 or 2.
That's a really good way of looking at it. The other thing to keep in mind, I think, is like knowing which order those plates fell in, and what parts of each of those plates belong to one another is really challenging, because even now, even before AI, whenever there was an incident, unpiecing how that incident happened and trying to get all of the logs, and then this is when you realize like your backups don't work properly, your logs weren't logging from the certain boxes, like at the rate that we're moving, it's so hard to actually unpiece what actually happened after the fact as well. But I like your analogy. I think that's really good.
And I'll add one more thing. I think that's like top of mind for us. So beyond kind of the guardrails and the adversarial approach to prompt injection and all that stuff, that's like kind of on the input. I think there's an important piece to talk about the output, and that's connected to what you just said about logging. I think if you give AI production access with right permissions to your database, if you're not logging every single write event with a rollback of 1, 2, 3, 4 steps behind, then you're probably doing it wrong at this point. I think that creates a huge amount of risk for the org.
Oh, for sure. I'm seeing all these companies pop up that are talking about like like simple things like where you can run a CIS benchmarking against your Azure environment and then fix all the holes with one click, right? And I'm like, great idea. Love the idea. I'm all for automating everything, and I try and automate everything, but I'm like, any company that actually tries to do that right now is just gearing up for a disaster. Like, I would just be worried. Like in this current moment in time, like I would just be very cautious about any type of change like that, especially any type of change that's not documented or logged, that you can see the entire trail history of like what has actually happened, what has occurred, show your work, like how did this actually happen, what was the logic that was used, where did the data come from, like I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're that far off either, but I just don't think we're there yet, and I think businesses are not going to be comfortable with it for a while. But I do think that the future is definitely going that way, and I think if we're we'd be kidding ourselves if we didn't think that it was.
Yeah, I think we can automate the path to the press the button, but we shouldn't probably automate press the button just yet. And this is coming from somebody who has had to reset their own, like previous life, previous startup, their own GCP permissions database, like the whole IAM database, because something got messed up.
Oh, for sure. And also, like for us, we're mixing data sets together that have never previously been mixed together. Like I can give a couple examples of that. So like we're mixing like like SIEM data with with XDR data, with HR data, with like CRM data. So like those four, like the first two are pretty obvious. But like the other two, like just mixing them together and then trying to see the correlations between them, like it's coming up with some really interesting, correlations in terms of like who's talking to what customer externally, what are they talking to them about, like, and they also have like what rights do they have within the organization, like can they like is there room here for a multi-pronged attack based on like what's happening in these conversations, the type of conversations they're having, depending on what like data you have access to. But like it's just like AI is just giving you a lot of insight, but also giving you like a lot of false positives, because that could very well not be what is actually taking place. But because the data sets have never been connected before, it is drawing conclusions, and then you as the critical thinking human in the loop, like you're like, wow, that actually does look like that might actually be like it's just like just a lot of these scenarios have never been played out before, and like we just need to be very cautious about what we do with the data that's being presented to us.
1,000%. Correlation is not causation, and I think this is the perfect example for that. It's like having like almost like a recorder bot next to you. We have one of those at every meeting now, from various companies, and it's like you have access to like every single conversation that happens in the company if you want to at that point as the admin of that particular account, and that is a level of transparency that I don't think any company's ever seen before. Even like working with inside the office, like you have like your salespeople in the same room, and you can't follow all the conversations at the same time. And now you have access to their entire transcripts with every single customer, with every single kind of champion or sponsor or like decision maker and whatnot. And you're trying to figure out like what their deal is and like what they promised, what they didn't promise. Now, like kind of you can chain back like, well, hey, this salesperson lied to this particular prospect, and then now they're an angry customer. So like that wasn't really easy to do to track back in the day.
Accountability in real time, right? Like we've never
Yeah.
seen it before. Yeah, it's a real. I mean, it's sci-fi level stuff that we're dealing with right now. It's really cool. Like, I mean, from like again from like our perspective, like from a security compliance perspective, it's game changing, right? Like one more example, like which we found like incredibly useful is like customer has an incident, they literally just have to type out like what that like just a high level of like what they think happened. Like, let's say like salesperson, disingenuous with customer, right? Tag the customer on it, pulls the customer data down, right? DocuSign contract, all of the HubSpot data, like all the back and forth, pull in the Zoom logs, see what they've actually said. It literally will generate out like, this is what the contract said, this is what was promised, like this is the disconnect, here is the next remediation steps, this is what needs to happen. And it's just really, really neat, like really neat correlation data that you can get out of it, and like be able to put an action plan together in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, and that becomes extremely interesting for higher risk use cases where you have the potential of insider trading, let's say, or leakage of classified various documentation or IP or whatever you're working on.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going with that previous example. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So, okay, let's go back to kind of people experimenting with AI internally. Like, I think with all this sci-fi stuff happening and like things moving very fast, like what are some of the good compliance hygiene steps that people can take to stay grounded?
Good hygiene steps that people can take to stay secure.
Yeah, stay grounded in this kind of fast moving world.
Yeah. That's a really good question. I mean, obviously, be very sensitive with the type of data that you do share, with with your various bots. If you are if you are technically inclined, you can run them locally as well, and they are very good, especially for like basic things. And I yeah, sharing data, controlling the data inputs, running it locally. Um, yeah, that would be some of the basics.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that the like work with aggregations if you can, and not with individual like customer data when you're running stats. And then I think this local host thing is like I can't stress that enough how important that is to like if you're able to pull that data on your local machine through a
Yep.
read-only endpoint that has access to very specific schemas instead of the entire production database, then you're in a much better position from a security standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. And if you really do, yeah, totally. And if you really do need to run certain data through it, you can anonymize the data, the Excel sheets, whatever you're using first, for sure. But yeah, they made it really easy. Like Llama, like you can install like in a matter of minutes, and like it's pretty. Um, well, I would say it's pretty easy to, but maybe not for the non-techie folk.
Well, I mean, you still need like RAM, and you still need all like a
It's true.
pretty
It's true. I
pretty
mean,
good.
it does work, but it can be super. It will be
Yeah,
super slow. Yeah.
yeah, and I think ultimately like LLMs don't need email addresses or home addresses or any kind of like PII or credit card numbers or social security numbers to infer whatever you're trying to infer based on the data that you have. I think that's kind of my takeaway as a marketer, like a go-to-market person, as a kind of working with customer data every day. You
For
don't
sure.
need that in your day-to-day life unless you're like doing some action, and that's where you come in and you make sure you handle that data according to your policies.
For
I think
sure.
that's the
Yeah,
piece.
and like for me, like I guess like from a security and compliance professional, like it was just like I would just never put, I would just never run any type of data. Like I would never put any type of personal data um, through an LLM. Like I would, like you just need a translation table, right? If you have user information, just remove the users, put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then just have a translation table that you can then compare the data to after. That just makes it a lot easier to you know, uh,
100%.
correlate the data.
That's why we have UUIDs. That's why we have like non kind of PII IDs in databases instead of like the email address as the
Exactly.
primary lookup. The other thing I think
Yeah.
that I wanted to touch on is the MCP servers and like how that's exploded in the past few months. I think people are super excited to get started with those. What's your stance on integrating those in any kind of process right now? Like where people should be looking out for?
Um, Yeah, that's a very good question. So like when the MC like when MCP popped up, like our engineers got super excited about it because we're already leveraging something like that as well, like through what we're calling um, the workflow automation engine, and like I don't know, it's a very um, it's a natural progression. I think it's like a natural progression to like the next step, right? Like, it just makes it a lot. It just makes it's very intuitive, very easy to use. Like I don't know, Titus, what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, I think from our perspective, the reason this is interesting is like I think it all came out with kind of roll your own, figure out how this fits in your org, and it kind of leave out the authentication piece at the very beginning. Like it was not even OAuth 2.1 compliant. Like there was no way to do that. You have to kind of essentially figure it out on your own. I think where this is going, from at least our perspective, is we're going to see a world where every MCP server call will be an authenticated MCP server call instead of a non-authenticated one, because like as you commingle data into the same server, there's definitely a risk of context leak,
Yeah,
and then you end up with some information that belongs to customer A that ends up in response to customer B without you intending to do that.
that is our biggest worry by far is obviously that.
And it's one of those things like it's not obvious that it can happen, but like if you use LLMs long enough and you have like longer conversations in the same kind of thread, the context deteriorates over time,
Mhm.
and then you end up with unintended consequences. Now, sure, this is the problem with the transformer models, right?
Yeah,
We're now seeing cool stuff come out of like Google I/O and whatnot when it comes to like diffuser models, which well, I'm sure will have different security problems because you have to do the diffusion in a, again, segregated environment on specific customer one versus customer two data versus customer three, and not like commingle everybody in the same
Yeah.
diffusion. So lots
No.
more to work on from that perspective.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, wild times.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So I know we're definitely over the 30 minutes that we typically do. So this is super interesting. I think if somebody wants to follow what you guys are doing at Compyl, where should they be looking?
We're super active on LinkedIn. So Compyl is compyl.com. We got a new website, got a new product out. But yeah, LinkedIn, you can follow me. I'm Stas, Stas Bojoukha, Bojoukha. There's only one of me on LinkedIn, but I'm also very active, and we're we're on the road this year, so we're going to be. Thank you. Yeah, we're doing a pretty good whistle stop tour of the U.S. right now, so chances are we'll be in your major city sometime this year. So feel free to drop by. I think we're doing like every cybersecurity summit and several secure worlds, and I think most of the feature cons this year as well. And I think we're gearing up for Black Hat and DEF CON as well. So yeah, we're come check us out where we are.
Awesome. Well, Stas, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a super cool conversation. I know people see compliance as kind of like the bad person in the org said, telling you to not do that, don't install that, don't use your personal account on your work computer. But I think this kind of conversation goes a step further, and I hope we taught people at least a few lessons on like what they can do today, what they should prepare for tomorrow as they're integrating AI, more and more MCP servers and so on, and keep things going as they're building. So.
Totally.
Thanks again for joining us, and for everybody watching, listening, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with a founder or a team that needs to scale fast and is worried about compliance. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow us on your favorite platform. It helps us bring you more great content. So, and don't forget to check out Civic